Hello, I'm Richard Jackson. I'm the Project Officer for York Archaeology in Sheffield. I'm here to show you around the remains of the upper and nether slack wheels sealed beneath a works called IFA in Sheffield. You're looking at the central part of the archaeological excavations we've been undertaking at a site called IFA, Independent Forging and Alloys, which is situated at Liversey Street in Sheffield, just off Penistone Road. We're here because we've been tasked to undertake some archaeological evaluation and some mitigation relating to the early origins of this site. It's quite a special site in that sense, because a lot of areas in Sheffield have this legacy of metalworking and water power beneath them, but this site in particular is still a live engineering site that's developed directly out of that original late medieval origins. Alright, you're looking at the core part of what was originally Evaluation Trench 5. So what you can see here is a massive set of sandstone structures in the base of the trench. So going from left to right, you've got one substantial wall there, which is the outer wall of a goit or a water channel for powering the mill. Got a big central platform there to provide foundations for the axle water wheels that went across between the two mill buildings. You've got another channel in there, and then you've got the end wall defining that. This is the location of what was called the upper slack wheel back in the day. This is a very early piece of Sheffield cutlery manufacture that you have here. So this, we think, began around about 1581 is when we first have historical records relating to the siting of this mill. So we have the upper slack mill at this end of site. Way back over there, which we'll be showing you later, is the nether slack wheel. Both of them called wheels because that's the vernacular terminology that is used to describe cutlery manufacturing sites. Big water wheel powering lots of small grinding troughs for getting cutlery finished off to that perfect cutting edge. But we don't see much of that here. What we do see is the wheel pit, which is a fairly rare survival of this type of archaeology beneath a site that was so intensively developed after. So you see that large sloping stone surface in front of you there with the two iron staples holding it together. That is representative of the leading edge of the wheel pit. We think that the water wheel would have sat within there and been powered by the water coming off the River Loxley, which is just to the northwest over there. A lot of engineering goes around these sorts of sites before this part that we're looking at here. So all of this water power is enabled by the construction of a water channel or goit, which came off the Loxley, flows through this upper slack wheel, through a small reservoir in the middle of site, over to the nether slack wheel, and ultimately back into the Don, which is just beyond our site there. So what you're standing on effectively is an island between the Loxley and the Don. We think there's some damage has been done to this during demolition. It's possible that was the remains of the sitting for a pen trough as well, which is the channel that carries water over the water wheel if it's a breast shot or an overshot wheel. And as we see here, it's quite a monumental set of construction that they've had to do here. It wasn't undertaken lightly, and they knew it had to stand quite a lot of damage and wear and tear over the course of its life. So this is specialist quarrying stone, also put in place by a millwright. It's not the sort of casual building exercise. It was required specialist trained people who were probably in demand all over the country for their specific skill sets. These water wheels then power multiple grinding troughs originally. We know that this area was converted to a tilt forge, so that's a slightly more complicated version of a hammer and anvil, only it's water powered. So you'd have an immense hammer striking multiple times a minute all around the clock, specifically for forging of metal. So wherever you've got that going on, you have ancillary forges nearby because you need to keep heating the metal. So you've got your water wheel pit here with possibly some sightings for tilt hammers, and then some forges out of the side. The other thing that's very interesting to note around here is because this place developed into the 19th and 20th century as a large-scale engineering works, you've got the hallmark of that period as well, which is you've got some really substantial drop hammer bases. These were steam powered originally, then got changed over to belt drives when they were electrically driven in the 20th century. So all around here, what was euphemistically called the light engineering shop, although it was full of these gargantuan, very noisy hammers striking metal all around the clock. And that's one of the things we looked at during our evaluation. We found some very substantial hammer bases here. Hundreds of tons sometimes these things can weigh, which is why they're still in the ground now. So we have one of those in situ over to that side, and we've got another big example over here as well. So those are very, very heavy structural items. What you're looking at in the ground is very much just the tip of the iceberg as well. You see the supports for the feet, for the A-frame for the hammer base itself, and a central anvil base as well. So these things were designed to really, really take punishment over their working life. And there are examples of this that you can still see working in the forge today. The design of them hasn't changed much. The power operation of them is really what changes. So they're changing the power supply to it, but they're not really radically changing the design of the forge itself. I'm standing within the guts of the former nether slack wheel. This was something that was originally built on the side of a goit coming off the Loxley in the late 1500s or the early 1600s. What we have here is the very core of a late medieval cutlery wheel. They're called cutlery wheels in a vernacular sense because they were powered by a giant water wheel that would have sat over to my left-hand side on the other side of this massive wall. We don't see a lot of evidence of cutlery grinding in the ground preserved in the archaeology because this was such a successful site. It was redeveloped into a tilt mill, which is a large forging mill where the water power is converted to power a large hammer that is specifically designed and used just to forge metal all day long. So you have the original foundations of the cutlery wheel, then rebuilt with these massive stone blocks here. It's a different level of masonry that's quite monumental in scale. But I am standing more or less where my feet would have been getting wet, although the goit would have been on the other side of the water, on the other side of the wall running through there. So you have a large axle running through the wall here. We have the remains of a big metal bracket that would have supported that, supported by all this massive stonework. So in here would have been lots of whirring flywheels and gears designed to gear down the power from the water wheel to make it useful for the tilt forge. You wouldn't have been able to hear a word I was saying here in the 18th century. Constant clamour of metalworking. And this is very much the nucleus of that operation, which then enables lots of other smaller trades to develop around it. Into the late 1700s and operating very successfully, that was a period when all of the waterside sites in Sheffield had been developed as water-powered cutlery works or forges. So there were functionally no other places left you could have put water wheels at that time. And luckily at that time, that's when steam power starts becoming developed as a source of power. Here they don't abandon this site though, they keep using it because they have a working forge, and this area became part of Doncaster's legacy. Daniel Doncaster and Sons, one of the enormous steelworking dynasties of Sheffield. They had their steel production plant further up the road, closer into town, at a site called Hoyle Street that we excavated back in 2018. That's where their primary steelworking was going on, where they were converting iron into steel and then pouring it into crucible pots. Here, however, is where the actual forging took place. Again, this is a very old craft that's essentially upskilled and up capacity by harnessing the water power and being able to hammer more metal all day and all night long. Behind me, you can see the large stone blocks that were the foundations for part of that machinery that was taking the power off the water wheel and converting it into rotary power to then power the tilt mill. Off to my right, you can see the floor surfaces and smaller details that relate to the other use of this building as it develops into a tilt mill, and into the 19th and 20th century it became a wire mill as well. So there's a constant evolution of the output of this place. So we're now standing on the northeast side of the Goyt that fed water power into this mill, the nether slack mill. Preservation's not always good on these sites, which kind of highlights how good we were served by the archaeological preservation over on the southwest side of the Goyt. Here, this again is still part of the nether slack wheel. There was one mill on either side of the Goyt, we believe. This is all that's left of this one though, a large substantial sandstone wall that's been rebuilt in the later stages. We think it's original up to about this level, and then the stonework on top of that has been replaced and repointed. We can tell that partly by the shape of the blocks themselves and also the mortar used. Up to about there, it's all white lime mortared and very carefully pointed. Above there, you're into the late 19th or early 20th century where there's thick applications of black ash mortar bonding that together. And of course the red brick wall on top of it is the ultimate giveaway. Worth noting with these sorts of red brick structures though, often the bricks are stamped with a logo or a maker's mark in the frog. On this particular site, a lot of the bricks are stamped with DD for Daniel Doncaster to reflect the overall owner of this site. But this is, again, a classic piece of mill architecture in the sense that it was built with one purpose in mind. It was still functioning as a decent sandstone foundation, and it's been repurposed. What you can see on the other side of it is part of the reason why we know very little else about the archaeology in this particular area, because you've had the 20th century steel and concrete construction carry on. This was used as a annealing forge, or a quenching tank rather, for the heat treatment of iron and steel parts as they were made, which is keying into the very precise metallurgy that is required to work on these sites and really understand the nature of what's been going on here. The level of work that they do increases as the scale of manufacture increases. So as they're harnessing larger items to bring more force to bear on their forgings and their castings, the scale of what they can make goes up, and the amount of money that is invested in the projects also goes up, but their global reach as an output also increases almost exponentially. But what you can see here, just the remains of that cogged device there, that's part of a chain drive that was intended to pull metal items through an oil or a water quenching tank to get them back to the right temperature required. So this is what we find at the northwest end of the nether slack wheel. We believe this is probably a slightly later version, or a later addition to the works, probably contemporary with the tilt mill phase rather than the cutlery grinding phase. And it's obviously a truncated remains of some kind of furnace base or forge base. It's not a crucible furnace because we know that they were melting their steel at the other end of town and bringing steel here. But this probably relates to the sort of forge you'd need to have to keep the metal at the right temperature for when you're heating it up, then for working it over at the tilt forge. And then stepping back in time, maybe another 100 years or so, this little area, this discrete area that we've spent a lot of time hand cleaning and getting ready for you to see today, this is one last remnant of the cutlery grinding that went on here. This orange material that's become embedded in the floor that you can see here is the residue of a material called swarth, and that's a combination of the sand and the grit that came off the grinding wheels as they wore down, mixed with lots of little fragments of ferrous oxide that came off the blades themselves. And when that's in the ground, it concretes, it sets very, very hard. We think they've actually just used it as a bedding layer. There's some evidence of mortar on top of it, so we think they probably bedded their flagstones directly onto this. This is a wonderful little bit of material culture that came from the cleaning on the northeast side of the Goyt. If you've never heard of Henderson's relish before, shame on you. But it is still made and consumed in great quantities in Sheffield today. It's like Worcestershire sauce, only better. Well, you're probably wondering what these are, and I don't know. Industrial archaeology throws up these little conundrums now and again. You can spend a lifetime digging these sites and understanding all the nitty-gritties of detail, but you'll always be faced with questions that are just very strange. These are probably contemporary with the original construction of the mill. They may well have originally been passageways through to the outside. They've been blocked off later, so this sandstone construction you can see sat within them is very clearly mortared and grouted over the original brickwork, so that's a later patch. It's quite possible they were simply there just to alleviate temporary floodwaters that may have come in and spilled out of the Goyt and through the works and out. And I'm basing that interpretation purely because they're on the downstream side of the mill. So if you wanted that kind of access or egress for floodwater, then it's probably a good place to put it. We've got two as well in classic archaeological typological situations. We've got two of these, not quite the same. So someone, me, is going to have to account for the difference between these two and try and work out exactly why they were situated here and why. Sometimes you don't get an answer from the archaeology and you have to spread your net a bit wider, so we're hoping to consult with both some of the people who worked here and also people from Sheffield museums who have a wealth of industrial archaeological experience to contribute as well. So here we are at the end of, pretty much the end of this excavation. We've been here 3 weeks, and the real reason we're here is partly because our client has a planning condition they're interested in, but really it's our job to try and understand the amount of archaeology left in the ground by these processes and to put them in their proper context so we can all understand the significance. In this case, what this represents is the continuing tradition of metalworking in Sheffield from its early medieval roots as very small, isolated cutlery works, developing into bigger and bigger, more complex concerns that represent the diversification and intensification of these sorts of operations as we come from the post-medieval period into the industrial.